Hi everyone and welcome to Nightmare Vault. If you're new here, consider subscribing. We dive deep into the darkest, most chilling real-life horror stories out there. And if you're a returning viewer, I'm so glad to have you back, friend. In this video, we're going to explore 3 stories sent in by people who live deep in the Appalachian forest. Living out there means waking up to some of the most beautiful views in the country. But it also means getting used to the isolation and to the strange things that seem to happen more often than they should. The first story is very real and unfortunately way too common in this country. It's the kind of thing that sticks with you, especially for someone like me who's lived through something similar. The last 2 stories are harder to explain. They don't have clean endings or easy answers, but I keep hearing more and more accounts like these. The final one, especially, it's about someone who's not even sure if what they experienced was real or something their mind created. Personally, I think it was real, but I'll let you decide. As always, turn off the lights, get comfortable, and enjoy the video. And remember, viewer discretion is advised. Story 1, The Watcher in the Storm These Days. The man who tells this story lives in New York City, but he grew up and spent his entire childhood in West Virginia. Up until the night this story takes place, he loved living there. But after what happened, he could never think of that place as home again. It has been 23 years now, and he can finally look back on that night with a bit of emotional distance. The hardest moments are when he goes to visit his parents and steps back into that house, that room, and that night. He had just turned 13 the week before, and in all his pre-teen arrogance, he was starting to act out a little, fully convinced he was already old enough to make his own decisions. The house was in a neighborhood with a few other houses nearby, but right in the backyard was the edge of one of the largest forests in the region. His parents were always really strict about never leaving him home alone. They lived in a place that was relatively quiet, sure, but it wasn't unusual to hear about small break-ins now and then. And the year before in the neighboring town, a kid had completely vanished. He was only 7, taken from inside his own home while his parents and grandparents were there. It had been a huge scandal in the area, and it only made his parents, and honestly most of the parents in the area, even more cautious. That particular night, he'd had a fight with them in the afternoon. He can't even remember what started it, but he remembers exactly how it ended, shouting and his firm decision that he was not going to his mom's work party. He was dead set on it. He remembers yelling to the point where his mom, who rarely lost her temper, got really mad. It might have been one of the worst arguments they ever had. They were genuinely hurt, and he remembers them walking out and slamming the door behind them without saying a word. They'd planned to be back right after dinner. He, on the other hand, was proud of himself. He finally had the whole house to himself and could do whatever he wanted, at least until they got back. He knew he was being totally stubborn, one of those arrogant kids who thinks they know everything. But to be fair, that phase came and went pretty quickly. Most kids go through it at some point, some more than others, but it's pretty much a universal experience. Since he didn't have a TV in his room, he stayed in the living room. It must have been around 8:30 p.m. when the storm started. Heavy rain, pounding wind. He could hear the trees whipping around out back, and he had to turn the TV up just to hear anything. At about 9:10, the landline rang. It was his parents calling to say there had been a landslide on the main road into town and traffic was completely blocked. That's when he realized how serious the storm actually was. His mom was speaking louder than usual, maybe because of the rain hammering down on the car. He told them not to worry, that everything was fine. He was still trying to play the part of the angry kid, but his mom's voice, sad and anxious, just erased any leftover anger he had. So he told her he was okay and asked her not to worry. She gave him a list of things to do: double-check that all the windows and doors were shut tight and unplug a few appliances just in case the storm caused a power surge. Supposedly, his dad had already locked everything before they left, but they wanted him to check anyway. You could hear the storm from downstairs, but once he started going up the stairs, he realized the second floor was way colder, and the sound of the rain and wind was way louder. At first, he thought it was just the master bedroom, which faced the woods and always sounded louder when it rained. But when he got to the top of the stairs, he noticed the bathroom window was wide open. He didn't think much of it and assumed the wind had blown it open. He went over, shut it, and headed back downstairs to wait for his parents. But time kept passing and nothing happened. Then around 9:45, the phone rang again. His parents wanted to check in, saying the police were trying to clear the road. With a little luck, they'd be home in an hour. He was about to hang up when he heard the upstairs floor creak. The house wasn't new, and they'd had moisture issues for a while, so certain spots, especially near his room, always creaked when someone stepped on them. He hung up and froze, trying to figure out if he'd imagined it. It was a faint sound, barely noticeable, but it was there. The floor was creaking. And then, as suddenly as it started, the sound stopped. He told himself it was probably just the wind or a pressure shift or something. There couldn't be anyone inside. If there were, he'd be hearing more than just faint creaks. He sat back down in the living room, but he was getting more and more anxious. All he wanted was for his parents to get home. There's something he hasn't mentioned. He's diabetic and has to check his blood sugar regularly. He's known how to recognize the warning signs since he was a kid. If his levels get too high, he needs insulin right away or he could go into shock. All his medical supplies were on his nightstand. And even though it was the last thing he felt like doing, he knew he had to go upstairs. He started climbing the stairs, and as he got near the top, his whole body tensed up. Parts of the hallway floor were wet, like someone had come inside with soaked shoes and left a trail. That's when it all clicked: the open window, the noises upstairs, and now this. But when he first came up to close the window, there hadn't been any water on the floor. This meant that if someone had come in through there, they were already inside the bathroom at the same time he was, probably hiding in the bathtub while he was standing just a few feet away, closing the damn window. That realization terrified him in a way he still can't fully explain. It felt like he almost had a heart attack right there. His room was the first door in the hallway. Then at the far end was the bathroom, and next to it, his parents' room, right where the floor was wet. Very slowly, he stepped into his room and closed the door behind him. His parents had a strict rule: no locking bedroom doors, so they'd taken the key out. In that moment, he would have given anything to know where they kept it. He ran to his nightstand, grabbed his glucose meter, and checked how much insulin he needed. That's when he heard the floor creak again. He grabbed everything and hid inside his closet. Now, here's the thing about that closet. When his parents bought the house, his room was originally 2 separate rooms. They turned them into one, but there was a part of the wall they couldn't completely remove. So, they built a closet around it. To make the most of the space, they added a hidden crawl space in the back that no one knew about. It was his favorite hiding spot when he played with his cousins. He kept hearing the creaking clearer now, like the footsteps were coming from his mom's office in the next room. It gave him just enough time to inject the insulin. Then he heard his bedroom door open. Someone had actually come in. By that point, he was already inside the crawl space, and the door was shut behind him. He doesn't think he's ever been so scared in his life. They walked through the room, circled the bed, and peeked behind the curtains. They were definitely looking for him. Then he heard footsteps coming toward the closet. He heard the door open, felt the clothes being pushed to one side. He was sure they'd find him, but after a long silence, the footsteps moved away and he heard them sit down on his bed. He had both hands over his mouth, trying not to make a single sound. And then over the sound of the rain, he heard his parents' car pull into the driveway. The person got up, walked to the window, and opened it. A few seconds later, he heard the front door open. His mom started calling his name. That's when he lost it. He broke down completely, crying like he'd never cried before, like all the fear he'd bottled up suddenly tore its way out. He heard his parents calling louder, maybe already sensing something was wrong, but he couldn't answer, let alone move. He had no idea if that person was still in the house. What he remembers after that comes in flashes. He remembers his parents carrying him out of that crawl space, almost dragging him out. He remembers trying to explain through pure panic what had happened. The police arriving, a really kind woman asking him questions he couldn't answer. He never saw the person's face. He didn't even know if it was a man or a woman. After everything that happened, he was never left alone again. The following week, his parents installed an alarm system. Later, they were told that a man had been arrested for breaking into another house and stealing valuables. They said it was probably him, but he knew it wasn't. The person who came into their house had the chance to steal something and didn't take anything. Nothing ever happened again, and over time, he calmed down. But that night shattered his sense of safety in that house. He moved on and rarely thinks about it, except on the nights he goes back to sleep in that room and becomes that terrified 13-year-old kid all over again. Story 2, The Unwanted Tenant. What is about to be told is something that is still happening as this account is being written. And it's something that truly unsettles the storyteller. Not just because it's happening in his own home, the one place that's supposed to be safe, but also because he genuinely can't explain it. No matter how hard he tries to reason it out, no matter how much he relies on logic, every attempt ends in a dead end. That's why he is turning to others. Not because he expects answers, but maybe just to feel like he's not completely alone in this frustrating attempt to make sense of the absurd. The truth is, it all started about 5 years ago when he decided to buy an old mansion deep in the Appalachian Mountains. It seemed perfect for what he was looking for, steeped in history, full of old architecture. And although there were several details that weren't disclosed up front, including its exact location, which he legally can't reveal due to a confidentiality agreement he now, in hindsight, realizes he should never have signed. He still believes that anyone from the area or anyone who's seen some of the YouTube videos going around probably knows exactly which house is in question, or at least the general area. The mansion isn't isolated. There are others like it in this region. Just for some context, so no one thinks he's completely insane for buying an old mansion out here, there was a very specific reason he wanted it. He's a historian and has always been deeply fascinated by old houses. Not just their architecture or the way they withstand time, but because they tell stories. Stories about the people who lived in them, the families who came and went, and the secrets they buried in their rooms, their halls, and their attics. He has always believed a house can be a direct reflection of a family's social standing, its ambitions, and its eventual downfalls. Most of his research focuses exactly on that, the buried secrets of once powerful families. When he saw the mansion, or rather this isolated manor, he didn't hesitate. The price was unbelievably low. And even though the place was in terrible condition for a structure over 200 years old, something about it pulled at him. It felt like the house was waiting for someone who understood it. And since he has no family and a stable financial life, he jumped at the opportunity without thinking too much. Today, just a few months after moving in, he sees that as a huge mistake. Even though he bought it 5 years ago, he only moved in this year. The renovations were constantly delayed. Construction crews kept quitting. Some never returned after the first visit, and others walked off mid-project without much explanation, only saying the atmosphere was too heavy. While he tried to rationalize it, chalking it up to travel fatigue or the overactive imagination of superstitious people, he started to realize there was something going on that he just couldn't ignore. For context, the property is surrounded by a vast forest, and because it's classified as protected land, no new construction is allowed there. That was said to be one of the main reasons the house was so cheap. But since his interest was strictly the mansion and its history, that didn't bother him at all. The first few months in the house were strangely quiet. Not because there weren't any sounds, but because everything felt frozen, like time had stopped inside. Even the natural sounds of the forest kept their distance, like nature itself refused to come too close. And it was in that strange stillness that the little things began, small events that at first he tried to dismiss as distraction or fatigue. The first time he noticed something really odd, actually unsettling, was when one of his kitchen knives went missing. Not just any knife, but one of the largest ones, the kind you don't just misplace. He found it days later sitting on top of the bookshelf in his office, right next to an old letter opener he'd been using to examine historic documents. And although he found it strange, he blamed it on exhaustion. Long hours spent organizing archives and decoding old records. Maybe he'd grabbed the knife for opening packages. It wasn't that far-fetched. But then a pair of scissors disappeared from his nightstand and reappeared days later next to the upstairs bathroom sink, a bathroom he rarely ever used. That's when he really started to pay attention. He began noticing that whenever something went missing, it always turned up later, always in parts of the house he didn't frequent, as if someone, or something, wanted him to know they were aware of his routines more than he was comfortable admitting. It sounds bizarre and unsettling, but that's exactly how it felt. In fact, it's how he feels now as he sits writing this from inside the mansion. Like anyone in his position, he started sleeping poorly. He'd wake up in the middle of the night with the distinct sensation that someone else was in the house. But he never heard footsteps, never found open doors. And yet, paranoia began to creep in. That's when he started wondering if someone was somehow getting inside, trying to scare him into leaving, maybe hoping he'd sell the house for even less than what he paid. As far-fetched as that idea sounded, it was the only explanation that seemed remotely rational. Things got worse one night while he was already in bed. Doors and windows were all locked, something he did religiously. That night, he heard 3 solid knocks on his bedroom door. There's no way to describe the terror he felt in that moment. If everything was locked from the inside, then who the hell was outside his door? His heart was racing as he lay there, frozen, not moving, like a kid too afraid to look under the bed. He only got up once the police arrived. After a panicked, trembling phone call, they searched the entire house and found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no footprints, nothing. He knew they weren't trying to dismiss him, but he couldn't help feeling embarrassed, like a scared child needing attention. A few days later, feeling completely drained, he decided to go into town. He needed to pick up some basics, bread, rice, the usual. But more than anything, he needed to breathe, see people, get out of that house. He stopped by the usual grocery store and got into a casual chat with the owner, an older man who's been there forever and pretty much knows the entire history of the town. At one point, without thinking much, he mentioned he'd been living in the mansion up on the hill. As soon as he said it, the owner stopped arranging apples, froze, and looked at him with a strange expression. It wasn't fear like you see in movies, but it wasn't simple curiosity either. It was like he'd heard this story before too many times and already knew how it ended. That's when he told the historian, quietly, as if he didn't want the spirits to hear, that the house has an old reputation, one that goes back generations. That everyone who's ever lived there, and there haven't been many, eventually disappeared. No trace, as if the earth swallowed them whole. Then the house would pass to their children, who did everything they could to get rid of it as fast as possible, and those brave or foolish enough to buy it next, they disappeared too. The same pattern. The strangest part, according to the shopkeeper, isn't the house itself, it's the forest around it. He explained that according to the old folks, that patch of land never accepted the mansion's presence. It was like the house was built in a place that already had an owner, and knowing the history of these mountains, it did. What's truly frightening, he said, isn't ghosts inside the house. It's the ancient presences out there among the trees, beings that have always lived in the forest, that don't like intruders, that don't forget, and that wait for new occupants with a patience that doesn't belong to this world. He came back home with his head spinning. What the old man told him made sense. That's what disturbed him most, because everything he'd been feeling, the misplaced objects, the knocks at odd hours, the constant sense of being watched, fit that story too well. Like for the first time, someone had put into words what he couldn't explain. And yet it clashed with everything he believes in. He has always been rational, grounded. He doesn't believe in spirits, curses, or hidden forces. And yet, there's something there he can't explain, something he can't make fit into logic, no matter how hard he tries. How do you deal with that, when what you feel confirms the impossible? He just sat there on the porch staring at the tree line, not knowing whether what scared him more was what might be out there or the fact that he no longer trusted his own understanding of reality. Now, as he writes these lines, he knows he can't stay there. He needs to leave, but he also can't bring himself to sell this house to someone else without telling them what's going on. Because no matter how cheap it is, no price is worth the kind of dread that comes with living in a place where you don't know if you're alone, where every creak could be more than just settling wood. And that's why he's stuck, paralyzed, because this house doesn't want to be abandoned, but it refuses to be lived in. And he's there, trapped in the middle of that contradiction, afraid something might happen to him. Story 3, The Silent Follower. This is the story of how one man learned the hard way to respect the Appalachian Mountains, and the stories folks have been telling about them for generations. He's not saying he was disrespectful, exactly. He thinks it was more like he was naive, mixed with a little immaturity. He met his wife in college, and when they finished school and decided to start planning a life together, they chose this part of the country instead of the city. Needless to say, when he moved out there, he was the walking stereotype of a city boy. He was used to having everything nearby, used to all the buzz and noise, used to going out whenever he felt like it, used to walking the dogs at night. You get the idea. His wife warned him that things were different out there, that the mountains were old and that around those parts, people followed a certain code, not out of superstition, but out of survival. He brushed it off, thinking she was exaggerating. And in his early 20s cluelessness, he broke a few rules, and he swears one of those could have ended really badly. He moved out there when he was 22, 12 years ago now, and he's always been someone who liked late-night walks. He enjoyed walking or running, especially right before bed when the air was cooler. For weeks, his wife had been flat out forbidding him from going out after dark, saying she was too young to be a widow. He kind of thought she was joking, and since they were still new in town, he just went along with it. The night it all happened, an old childhood couple of hers had come over to celebrate the move, and they all stayed up late talking and drinking. His wife, who barely drinks, had a little more than usual that night and ended up heading to bed early, so he was left to clean up the kitchen. At first he felt tired too and figured he'd finish tidying up and crash. But somehow, by the end of it, he had this burst of energy and this weird excitement about finally living there. He even sat down on the couch for a bit to watch something. But he still had this buzz, this urge to get outside, stretch his legs, and check out the area at night. His wife was out cold, so he figured there was no harm in stepping out for a few minutes. He'd take a short walk, come back, and tell her about it the next day. Maybe she'd even start joining him. For some context, their place is in a little neighborhood, like a tiny village, completely surrounded by forest. To get to the main town, where the school and hospital and everything else is, you have to drive. Walking from their house to the edge of the woods where the houses stop takes maybe 5 minutes. So that's where he headed. He didn't plan on actually going into the woods. He knew that was risky, especially for someone who didn't grow up around that kind of terrain. He just wanted to get close, maybe look around a bit. He didn't have a real plan. At night, the town felt weird, like a ghost town. There wasn't a soul outside, not even someone taking the trash out. All the windows had the blinds pulled down, and even the streetlights were few and far between. No dogs, no cats, nothing. It honestly felt like one of those post-apocalyptic movies where the main character stumbles into an abandoned town after some huge disaster. He started feeling a little less confident about stepping out, but he kept going. When he got to the edge of the woods, he noticed it was way quieter than he expected. The usual sounds of nighttime animals were either missing or super faint, at least compared to what he thought was normal. He told himself he'd just go in a few feet, maybe past a couple of trees, then head back. That's when something happened. He doesn't know how, he swears he's got no logical explanation. He had literally just stepped in, maybe 4 or 5 trees in, when he felt the air get colder. At first, he didn't think much of it. He figured it could be chillier in the woods at night, but less than a minute later, what had been a cool breeze turned into this icy, freezing air, like the temperature dropped 15 degrees all of a sudden. Was it possible for a microclimate like that to exist? He had no clue, but it seemed like the only thing that made any sense. It was summer, so he was out in just a t-shirt. He figured he'd seen enough and it was time to head back. That's when he realized he didn't know where he was. He was completely turned around. He could have sworn he'd only walked for a minute or two. He could have sworn that if he turned around, he'd see the road. But there was nothing but forest, just trees everywhere. Then a fog started to rise, and that's when he really knew something was wrong. He started walking fast, almost jogging. He was convinced he'd walked pretty much in a straight line, so he couldn't figure out why he hadn't hit the road yet. The fog was getting thicker around him, making it harder to even see the trees nearby. He started to panic a little, not because of the forest or the fog, but because none of it made sense. There was no logical reason for him to still be out there. And the fog was getting so dense, he could barely see ahead. He hadn't seen fog this thick in years, but it wasn't the fog that scared him the most. It was how impossible the whole thing felt. He kept walking, but at that point he was seriously doubting his sense of direction. And that's when he noticed something that made him genuinely terrified. He started hearing footsteps. Not just random ones, they matched his perfectly. At first, he didn't even think they were footsteps, probably because they were too in sync with his own. He stopped, trying to listen, and looked around, but he couldn't see anything. And he didn't hear anything else either, just silence. He started walking again, and the sound came back. He stopped again, and this time he said, "Hello." But the woods were dead quiet, not a single sound. Then, while he was scanning through the fog out of the corner of his right eye, he thought he saw a shadow. He turned and looked straight at it, and whatever it wasn't moving, but it looked like the shape of a person. He didn't stick around to figure it out. He just took off running. He didn't care what direction anymore. He just wanted to get out of there as fast as he could. The air felt heavy, and he started struggling to breathe normally, which was weird for him. He'd always been active, in good shape, and like he said earlier, he was used to running, but the more he ran, the harder it got. Finally, he saw a light in the distance. He ran toward it until he hit the road and saw the houses. The relief was instant, but he still didn't stop. He kept running until he was inside their house with the door shut behind him. He doesn't know how long he stood there, back against the door, trying to catch his breath and calm his heart down, but it was a while. He stayed up the rest of the night trying to make sense of what happened. The same questions kept bouncing around in his head. Was someone really out there with him? Or had he drunk more than he realized and freaked out over something totally normal? No matter how much he thought about it, he couldn't come up with a good answer. And by morning, all he felt was a deep sense of embarrassment. He never told anyone what happened, not even his wife. He just felt too stupid. And in the 12 years since, he's never stepped foot into those woods at night again. He loves living there now. And honestly, he feels more like a local than a city guy at this point. But sometimes at night, even when he's inside, he gets this weird feeling, like that cold air from that night is brushing against him again. It's probably all in his head. At least, that's what he keeps telling himself, so he doesn't have to think about that night anymore.